Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Eddie Aruza. A little over 2 weeks until Election Day, and the candidates for mayor are getting aggressive.
You asked Toni Preckwinkle, what are you called them just allies, the CTU and the SEIU. Those aren't allies. They funded 90% of your campaign.
At mayoral forums this week, candidates ramp up their attacks. And one debate that invited only 5 candidates is challenged in court by one of the contenders left out. First Ward Alderman Proco Joe Moreno under investigation after the married alderman reported his car stolen by a woman he claims to have dated.
With this investment comes 500 new jobs on the south side of Chicago.
Ford Motor Company, the country's second largest automaker, says it will invest $1 billion in Chicago factories. Meanwhile, on Chicago's south side, 2 Target stores close, creating a retail desert in predominantly black communities. The billionaire patriarch of the Ricketts family under intense fire after leaked emails in which he espouses anti-Muslim views. He apologizes and his kids distance themselves. And in sports.
And the score from Porter.
Former Washington Wizards player Otto Porter Jr. coming to Chicago after the Bulls trade Bobby Portis and hometown hero Jabari Parker for the 25-year-old forward. Joining us tonight are Greg Hines of Crain's Chicago Business, Marianne Ahern of NBC5 Chicago, Brandon Pope of WCIU TV, and Julie DeCaro of 670 The Score. Thank you all for being here tonight. Great to have you as always. And Marianne, we have had, I think, about 40 mayoral forums so far this election season. The latest was last night at Fox 32, but one of the presumed front runners or leading candidates didn't show up. What happened last night?
Well, interestingly, Bill Daley decided 2 hours before the Channel 32 forum to cancel. It was also the exact same day that the Chicago Tribune had a negative front page above the fold, rather large photo of him, and a story explaining that some 45 years ago, when he took the insurance exam, there are reports of an adjuster, an examiner, helped him pass the test. And sounded like, sure looked like, he didn't want to take any questions about that and instead attended an endorsement session with Local 130, the Plumbers. Big endorsement for sure. The Plumbers have 6,000 members. You could have done that any day of the week.
And yet he will participate in tonight's Fox Forum, which is not exactly in the same, it's not stylized the same way, yeah.
Right, doesn't have a live audience, it isn't in the same time slot. It is with 4 other candidates that they had to put together quickly after folks were upset for not being included in the first round.
And Greg, you had your hands full with your own forum this week, the Crain's Forum that you co-moderated. What was your takeaway from that?
My takeaway is we got a wide open race. Nobody's put this away. The front runners, the presumed front runners, Toni Preckwinkle, Susana Mendoza, Bill Daley, and Gary Chica, all kind of beat up on each other. That provides some openings for the second tier. People like Paul Vallis and Lori Lightfoot. We'll see if they can call in, but nobody is even, I'm not sure anybody's really had, certainly nobody's put it away. Anything could happen.
We saw a photograph of that forum at the beginning of the show here, and the body language, because of the way they were seated, I don't know how it was decided that Toni Preckwinkle and Susana Mendoza were going to sit next to each other. Okay, well, that's how it ended up, but it was a kind of an awkward situation for some of them, wasn't it?
Yeah, these folks don't like each other very much. You know, the nastiness has come out because, you know, because the way 2 months ago it looked like Preckwinkle and Mendoza were going to be the front runners. Maybe Daley would sneak in somehow. Then all this corruption stuff hit, and that knocked down the 2 folks ahead, giving everybody else a chance. So now it's a complete scrum. It's a free for all. You really haven't seen a mayoral race like this in Chicago probably 60 or 70 years.
And Brandon,
excuse me, the tracking polls are showing that so far it's undecided who is leading, and here we have just about 2 weeks left.
Yeah. Brandon, if Toni Preckwinkle thought it might be a cakewalk for her because she has kind of gone under the radar in terms of scandals or anything really controversial except for the soda tax up until now, this really has kind of exposed some of her weaknesses, hasn't it?
Well, definitely. You have the Ed Burke ties, really bad timing for the news cycle for her when it comes to that. But also, you had the situation that happened with the sexual harassment allegations inside her own office as a Cook County Board president. So she's been dealing with questions about all that stuff circulating at a time where you're trying to gain voters' trust. And like you guys mentioned, people are still undecided. I talk to people all the time. more people than most actually like, I have no idea who I'm going for at all. And I think some polling we're seeing from the Sun-Times might be inaccurate because I don't think we're accounting for younger voters, millennial voters, and their impact, who they came out pretty big for the polls in this past midterms. They're going to show up for this mayoral cycle as well, and that might cut in to some numbers as well for Preckwinkle and Mendoza.
Which really calls into question all of these forums that have occurred in the last several months. There have been very few televised forums. We're going to have a series of forums here on Chicago Tonight in the coming weeks. But has any candidate really distinguished themselves or said anything or really come out and made news in any way?
They've tried to, Eddie, but the problem is when you've got a field of 14, most of these forums don't have all the 14, they have 10 or 11. How do you ask questions? How do you have real back and forth among 10 or 12? It's almost impossible. I mean, we're in a situation where we're all going to roll the dice and flip coins, and then there'll be two people in the runoff, and then we'll be able to get into some depth. But structurally, it's almost impossible to get real interaction.
And well, as you noticed, and you played at the top of our show today, the soundbite from Gary Chico, who was after Preckwinkle, and he's a very strong debater, has been through a mayoral race before, and so I think folks are looking at him a second time and saying, you know, he is but where else is the substance? What else can you do for us if you are the mayoral candidate?
Julie DeCaro, I don't know how closely you've been following these forums, most of which have not been, as I mentioned, televised, but are there any takeaways, or are you listening or caring about anything that they have to say?
I mean, I care to the extent, I mean, those of us that live in the suburbs, work in the city, care because it affects our quality of life as well, right? I mean, but it does seem like a complete free-for-all. I have every day there's a different scandal with a different candidate, and it's hard to figure out who to throw your weight behind, because even the people that you thought were fairly uncompromised come out with a scandal, and then you're like, I don't know what to do, who to vote for. So yeah, I mean, it does seem very odd, and as long as I've been alive, there always seems like there was the very strong frontrunner who, you know, the Democratic machine was behind, and I mean, I would know as who I would vote for, and I'm glad I don't have to vote in this one.
And I would guess that many voters are in the same predicament that Julie is, where they're hearing a lot of things, and there's scandals and accusations and allegations being thrown around, and it's really tough to narrow it down, isn't it?
And we have.
Go ahead.
What we haven't even talked about is Amara, you know, and whether or not Amara, does she resonate? I mean, obviously she has Chance and Kanye, but hey, is that going to translate into votes?
But there's new scandals involving Amara and her past, and issues about her finances that have been raised this week.
The bottom line here is that, like in a good horse race, they're going into stretch and they're all bottled up together. Any little thing in the last week, the newspaper endorsements, any new scandal could tilt the thing. It's open.
And the question is, how do voters view these different scandals that are happening? With Amara, had to do with back taxes, not reporting income. I've talked to a lot of people that feel like that's relatable. And they're like, oh, who hasn't?
Well, I think Stacey Abrams proved that down in Georgia, didn't she? That when it's financial problems that aren't necessarily related to like criminal activity, people can relate to that. So that may be something people are willing to overlook.
But something else that I think is really interesting here, you're seeing a lot of big-time celebrities stay out of this. The only person that's got big-time celebrity backing has been Amara Enya with Chance the Rapper and sort of Kanye West. He hasn't really spoken about it, but he's given his money.
Rolls out Al Gore.
The check was nice, right? The check
Oh yeah, right. Daley is rolling out Al Gore,
Yeah.
so we'll see if that makes any kind of difference.
Well, let's turn to even more scandals at City Hall, and this issue involving Proco Joe Moreno, that he lent his car to her girlfriend, but then he reported it as stolen, and he is a married man. What's your take on this?
Anybody out there can connect the dots there as to how it looks. It doesn't look very good. And in the Chicago way now, anybody who's gotten support from him now is being attacked. You know that you got support from that weird alderman did this strange stuff. It doesn't look good.
Well, it doesn't look good, but at the same time, could he have committed a crime by filing a false police report?
That's up to the state's attorney. I mean, if indeed he filed a false police report, that presumably would be actionable should the state's attorney decide to prosecute. But it's been a while. It depends on the quality of the evidence. I don't know what Kim Foxx is going to do, but the major effect for the time being is political.
And as if the downfall of Ed Burke wasn't well on its way, now there is video that has surfaced of him allegedly electioneering last November. He wasn't at the ballot at the time, but he was at a polling place distributing what appears to be political material. And now Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia says that we need election monitors in the 14th Ward in a couple of weeks to make sure that Ed Burke and his minions aren't electioneering.
Not only is there video of him handing out these bags of apparently with his name and other information inside, but one of the county commissioners said that when folks handed in their ballot in November, before they handed the ballot in, they were asked to sign Ed Burke's petition, his nominating petitions. And when they asked him to stop, from the video, you can see that he's ignoring the election judge at the scene, saying, no, it's fine. I've done this before, whatever it is. Yes, they probably do need some monitors in the 14th ward. Maybe Jimmy Carter's available to come up and help out here.
Well, he is a pretty well-known monitor in international elections. This is what Chuy Garcia calls old practices and questionable practices. And when it comes to that, there are revelations also that Ed Burke got breaks from the former assessor Joe Barrios on the taxes on his house, cutting them essentially by half. Are you surprised, Brandon Pope?
I don't know if anyone's surprised. I mean, we're speaking about a new story almost every week when it comes to Ed Burke and other aldermen and what they're getting into, and it speaks to the issue many have with the city in general, corruption or the appearance of corruption. So yet you have another revelation coming out about kickbacks. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. If you've seen the movie Widows with Viola Davis and Liam Neeson, it's part of the Chicago identity now, it seems like, and that's sad to see. And it's going to be interesting to see how in this mayoral race and in these aldermanic races, how people address that, because that's a key campaign issue now, is like, how do you fix corruption and the appearance of corruption in our city government?
The Chicago way of doing things, though, is getting a lot more exposure and attention, and it's being revealed. Do you think that this is finally going to bring about change, Greg?
Well, I mean, there's clearly some things that could be done. For instance, there's been a lot of talk and forth about aldermanic prerogative. This tradition we have where the alderman gets to decide what gets built in his ward, who gets a zoning permit, who gets a driveway permit, that kind of thing. Some of this clearly ought to be taken away from aldermen. They shouldn't. If you want a loading dock permit for your new bar, you shouldn't have to go to the alderman. I mean, that should be handled routinely, administratively, because too many aldermen have been convicted of shaking down applicants for money. Yeah. On the other hand, core zoning questions are a lot harder to resolve. How do you tell? I understand the idea, but how do you tell an alderman he can't or she can't represent their constituents if they don't like a project that's going in? So ultimately, this all depends on picking the right people for the job. You can make some choices, you can enforce some new laws, whatever, but ultimately, if you pick skunks, you're going to get a stinky alderman.
Well, the question is, is there somebody that's not running that's the skunk in your ward that you can elect and have as your representative? But you also had a scoop on the salacious information concerning Alderman Danny Solis. Tell us a little bit about that.
One of the things that's put corruption right in the front of all this was a revelation by the Sun-Times that Danny Solis, then chairman of the zoning committee, was under apparent federal investigation. He'd worn a wire that he'd taped Mike Madigan, who's the ultimate goal if you're a federal prosecutor in the state.
And more significantly, Ed Burke.
And Ed Burke. The Sun-Times didn't say anything. All this was based on an affidavit that was filed by the FBI to get a search warrant for Danny Solis' office. And Sun-Times didn't say a word about how or why are the conditions, but it turns out to be there's two things here. One, this warrant I referred to was inadvertently posted in open form on the federal government's website. The circuit court's website is called PACER. It immediately got closed. But
it was supposed to be sealed.
It was supposed to be sealed.
Yeah.
It immediately got closed by the judge in charge of the case, but by that point, the Sun-Times had a copy, and they were writing about it. The judge, I'm told, didn't want them to write about it. Actually issued an order telling him, no, don't print it. But prior restraint in this country is very hard to enforce. The Sun-Times printed it anyhow. And we'll see if and when the judge decides to do anything about it. But so far, they have this great story.
And so far, Danny Solis has not been seen anywhere, has he?
He has not been
He's
seen.
He's gone underground, and
right.
Secret tunnel somewhere. Huh?
His time in office is coming to an end in April. But he still has work to do, doesn't he?
Well, he does have, as an alderman, he has decided to resign from his chairmanship of the zoning, but that took some pushing. The mayor said, let's wait and see at first, initially, and then changed his mind on that, and he was pushed off the zoning committee.
And now you have candidates running for his own position who are sparring over their own connections they've had to him, defending themselves on the defense because they've been pictured with him and what he's gone through. So,
though, despite all this back and forth, one of the things that he signed off on at the last minute, this huge TIF in the South Loop for the 78 property, this huge development, is going to go through with his support. It's in his work.
yeah,
There's a lot of guilt by association in this race, isn't there?
seems like
Oh,
it.
for sure. They're already been labeled the Burke Four. So, yes, those who have any kind of ties to Ed Burke, right.
All right, let's turn to some business headlines. Raise income taxes to fund pensions. That's the proposal from one of Chicago's most elite business groups. The clock is ticking on Mayor Emanuel if Elon Musk's ambitious O'Hare Express train is to get launched. Target closes 2 Chicago stores in predominantly African-American communities, creating a big retail desert. Meanwhile, Ford says it's bringing 500 new jobs and $1 billion in investments to the southeast side. So there are a lot of proposals coming this week from a lot of different sides saying that taxes need to go up to fund all of the financial crises that exist in the city and state. One is coming from the Civic Committee, and that one is something of a blockbuster, isn't it, Greg?
It's a little bit of a surprise. They say we can't kick the can down the road anymore on pensions. We need to come up with money right now. We can't wait for J.B. Pritzker's graduated income tax, or we can't maybe try to reopen the Constitution and limit pension benefits. So they want to raise everybody's income tax 1% above the top across the board. They want to extend the sales tax to cover more services. That they say would be enough to pay the pension bills, balance the rest of the budget, and provide a fair-sized rainy day fund. Not surprisingly, the thing got all kinds of instant attack. People on the political left said, hey, you're trying to undermine the graduate income tax. People on the right said, you can't raise taxes, you're going to force people out of town. Their response to all this is, we got to do something because every day we're a little further behind.
Mm-hmm. Julie, I would imagine that you would like to pay more in income tax starting soon.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, do you think that everybody needs to pitch in at this point in Illinois to start paying down these pensions?
I mean, I'm not an economist, obviously, but I don't know what the alternative is. It feels like it's inevitable at some point. And you're right. I mean, every day that this goes unaddressed, we are falling further behind. It maybe feels like it's time to just bite the bullet. I mean, nobody wants to pay higher taxes, but at the same time, we're getting into territory here where maybe we're not able to catch up at some point. So if that's what it takes to end this and get it, get everyone's local schools funded. I mean, we're having to write letters at my school district to the governor asking him to release funds for this and release funds for that.
Yeah, the whole at last count is $130 billion in unfunded liability, and we're paying interest on that every day.
Yeah, I mean, if it takes 1% tax hike to bite the bullet for everybody, and this issue finally goes away, then fine.
Are you on board, Brandon?
I mean, I'm wondering how the politics are going to work out, because that's not a popular idea, taxing people's retirement income. For a while, that's why people just stay away from that. It's kind of a polarizing issue, and a large part of the voting bloc is retirees. So we got to see how that plays out. I don't know how I feel about it, but I think the people of the city, to hear them, they're tired of being taxed.
And the other proposal came from progressive activists and unions at the SEIU and the CTU. They also say that they want what they call the LaSalle Street tax and the head tax, which is an old concept anyway, but what about their proposal?
Well, on top of that, they want to have a city income tax. Anybody who with a household income of $100,000 a year, which is a lot of households if the husband and the wife both works, they have to pay 3.5% of the increment off the top to City Hall to pay for. Some of it might go for pensions, but they want some new stuff that they say would help poor people adapt to this economy. Free CTA rights for everybody, a lot more money on crime prevention, free community college for everybody.
Let's move on to this issue about Target closing in the South Side communities, and on the same week, Ford announces that it's investing in Chicago $1 billion. They say 500 new jobs. Is there a juxtaposition here that one community, actually two communities, are losing this major retailer for reasons that are really questionable? At the same time, another community is getting a lot of investment that's not necessarily predominantly African American.
You're right. I don't know if those are apples to apples. And what the sad part too about the Target is that perhaps earlier when the Target opened, there might have been a mom and pop store that closed because of that Target. Now, how is that going to be revived? And that, there's the plan that somebody needs to come up with. And there was one of the mayoral candidates put up with, maybe it might have been Chico, having buses take folks to get their groceries, and then folks laughed and said, well, how are they going to to carry all their groceries on the bus. But perhaps that's another way, get folks to the retailers that are open, or else help small mom and pop places reopen in the nearby neighborhood.
Brandon, is this a failure of the city to try to keep these businesses in these communities?
Well, I think many people feel that way. Many people feel like it shows a disinvestment in those Southside communities, especially in Chatham, seen as a food desert. I mean, you mentioned it. We're talking about busing people to get groceries. That's a necessity. You need your food. You need your medicine for your pharmacy. So I think that people are laying that at the hands of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, and they're looking at whoever's going to be the next mayor to step up and have a plan in place long term, like you said, after Target, to how are we going to fix this issue of food deserts and not having access to these resources near us, because it's all leaving the South Side, it seems.
Well, it's all leaving the north side, too, to a lesser degree. I mean, part of the problem here is people buy stuff on the internet now, and they go to Amazon and whatever, and that hurts local retailers who have kind of a hard time as it is.
Greg, do you expect the Elon Musk express train from the Loop to O'Hare to happen anytime soon or anytime at all?
I do not. The inside word is that Mr. Musk is still interested in doing it, but is really concerned that the next mayor wouldn't have his back like this one did. So he wants to see what's going to happen. Realistically, there's always been a lot of questions about this project, whether he can do it for the price he promises and whether indeed there's going to be no taxpayer money. If he really can do it all on his own nickel and there's no public risk, maybe, but it's nowhere high on the agenda of any of the mayoral candidates.
It feels a little bit like he's like Lyle Landley, right, with the monorail guy from The Simpsons. I mean, the LA already shut down one of his 2 projects, and the tunnel that he showed in LA is a bunch of Teslas on a track. I mean, it's just it just seems like a pipe
kind of comical.
dream.
It seemed like they're far from the high concept that they have proposed for the city. Let's move on to some sports. The Cubs family patriarch Joe Ricketts apologizes after emails of his containing anti-Muslim views are released. The Bulls trade 2 forwards for 1. Otto Porter Jr. comes to Chicago from the Wizards as former Bulls Bobby Portis and Jabari Parker head to D.C. Matt Nagy finishes his first season as the head coach of the Bears by winning the NFL Coach of the Year award. So the Joe Ricketts story doesn't really fall under sports except for his association with his children who own the Cubs. But this isn't the first time that his emails have been released and his views have been expressed. Is there any guilt by association in this case?
Well, I think the Ricketts family immediately coming out, the 4 children who sit on the board for the Cubs, and saying that, he has nothing to do with day-to-day operations. That's true. But the first round of emails that was released by Splinter make it pretty clear that, everything in this family, everything that has to do with any of their businesses is under one giant umbrella that's all for the elevation and the sustained wealth of the family, which is absolutely their prerogative. But Joe has his hands in everything, and so when you're talking about, is he at Wrigley Field? Is he talking with Theo Epstein every day about the lineup? No. Is he involved in things like maybe setting what the budget is going to be for free agency in the offseason? Probably. So I thought it was a little bit disingenuous to just say he has nothing to do with this.
Is it harming the franchise, though?
I think that there's been an accumulation of things harming the franchise. I think it started with the Cubs going out and getting Aroldis Chapman after his domestic violence suspension, bringing in then or re-signing Addison Russell after his suspension that has not even been served yet, bringing in Daniel Murphy, who had a lot of homophobic comments in the neighborhood right next to Boys Town. So I think that for different parts of the Cubs fan base, it has been an accumulation of things that just don't make you feel very good about the team.
Well, let's turn to the Bulls now. Is Otto Porter Jr. worth losing Jabari Parker for?
I mean, Otto Porter Jr. is a good player. He's not a great player. His productivity's been down a little bit this year. It just feels at this point like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, the Bulls need several top draft picks in order to rebuild this team. And at this point, even if they luck out and luck into the #1 draft pick and get Zion Williamson, I'm not sure how much that moves the needle on this team. There's so much that needs to be done. And when you see them play a team like Golden State, you really see how far they are from being competitive on a regular basis.
What did you think of the trade, Brandon?
It didn't do much to reset the deck for the Bulls necessarily, but it's a good second chance for Jabari Parker. Only playing 39 games, very short homecoming. So you'd hope with the Simeon grad, you want to see the best for him and hope he has a good opportunity there in Washington.
Are you surprised by Nagy getting the Coach of the Year?
No, well, only in the sense that Sean McVay didn't get it, because all we heard was what a delicate genius Sean McVay was going into the Super Bowl.
In the Super Bowl.
Yeah. But I mean, it was terrific. I think that, it's so funny because John Paxson yesterday was making the comment that, well, look at what the Bears did. They went from worst to first, and we can do the same thing, sort of ignoring the idea that the Bears went out and brought in a really young progressive GM, and then it's sort of a visionary offensive guru for a head coach who's also a great motivator of people. So I was thrilled to see Matt Nagy win that award. I thought it was well deserved.
So what about their prospects for next season?
They're going to be one of the favorites next season. I mean, they're bringing tons of guys back. Everybody's back pretty much, except you've got to worry about Adrian Amos and Bryce Callahan. But everybody's pretty much coming back. This team is obviously hungry. They feel like it was hard to watch the Super Bowl and not feel like the Bears really could have made a better game out of it. Yep. They beat the Rams, and they almost beat the Patriots. So I think that the team felt that way as well, and I think they're going to come out really hungry to go far next year.
I want to ask you something else, but we're out of time, so my thanks to Greg Hines, Marianne Ahern, Brandon Pope, and Julie DeCaro. And we're going to continue our conversation online in our web extra video. So we'll see you on the next edition of the Week in Review. I'm Eddie Aruza. Good night. So did you expect that from the two teams in the Super Bowl with such powerful offenses, what the result ended up being?
No. I mean, this year has been a year of huge scores. We thought it was going to be a shootout. So, I couldn't believe it. I think we went into the half at 0-3 or something like that. It was just, I can't believe this is the Super Bowl.
I just wish Kansas City would have got it.
Tell me when he's going to retire in my lifetime.
Oh, God, I hope so.
This year?
He's going to pay 10 more years because he eats kale or something.
Well, it's a lesson for us all. What did you think of Maroon 5?
Gosh, oh boy.
Yeah, did you like that?
That wasn't much of a halftime show, was it? It was a performance. Right?
They were better at the Pritzker inaugural.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, an accredited legal education provider and proud sponsor of the continuing legal education program for lawyers held at DePaul University College of Law on February 21st.